In the 1980s, there were a number of British train simulators that predated the mainstream. One of the best known was Southern Belle, which was set on the London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway in the late 20s, early 30s. Actually, in reality, the London, Brighton, and South Coast had been merged into the Southern Railway by then. There's a picture of the electrification. They ran steam even though they were electrified, so they ran H1 Atlantics like this one, H2 Atlantics like this one. And eventually, under the grouping in 1923, they adopted King Arthur's N15 classes from the London and South Western, which had been merged into the Southern Railway fleet. They were also some of the first trains to run Pullman equipment in the UK, although these were mostly parlour cars rather than sleepers. And when they went electric in 1933, they built a dedicated Pullman EMU, which is now being restored. Now, the game, of course, is crude because it's very old Commodore 64 technology, but as you can see, it's the full length of the line, and it had full steam train controls. And in addition, it was first-person perspective, which may have been a first, possibly. The sound was a little bit crude because obviously this was the era of the Commodore 64. And you can see it's pulling out there. I never completely figured out the controls on it because I don't have a manual for this game. The injector is obvious there, so I crack it open to prevent the boiler exploding. And the brakes are obvious, the dampers are obvious. The cutoff is obvious if you're familiar with steam locomotives properly. The V is the part I don't know. The regulator, of course, is R. You can see the regulator up in the upper left there. But the V, I didn't mess with the V because I couldn't tell what it was exactly. The fire is operated with the F key, which opens the doors, but I can't tell if it increases the rate of shoveling. I'm a little bit confused about how that works. Again, I don't have proper instructions. And as I said earlier, they replicated the actual London, Brighton, and South Coast main line to Brighton from London, Victoria. So here the train is pulling out, headed for Battersea Park. And they put a model of the Battersea Park power station, or more likely, simply a drawing. It's been said this is vector graphics, of course. This is not modern 3D. In the 1980s, that was practically unheard of. The game was released in 1985. So if you consider that, this isn't so bad. And the company was actually Hewson Consultants, not Ashley Greenup, who did CabView Driver. And Hewson Consultants ended up releasing a sequel to this. In 1987, and it was called Evening Star. Here you can see Battersea Park coming up. And Evening Star was praised for greater accuracy than this, actually, but the locomotive was not a King Arthur like this one. Yet they used the King Arthur, or rather reused the King Arthur graphics. Evening Star was not a King Arthur, it was a 9F, the last steam locomotive built for British Railways. And as you can see, the acceleration is pretty accurate. It's actually quite difficult to get the locomotive up to speed because it is older. It's a basically pre-World War I design. The thing is in the 1920s, it was still reasonably current, and it was better than what the London, Brighton, and South Coast had, so it made sense for the Southern to transfer the locomotives over. One inaccuracy is that the Battersea Park Power Station has more than 2 stacks. Now there's the real Evening Star. I got that from Wikimedia. And there's the line that it's run over. They didn't actually reuse the main line. They went with the Somerset and Dorset. So I'm going to do the training run here with total control. And as you'll see, it's very similar. Although the training run doesn't go the whole length of the line. It only goes to Evercreech. It doesn't go to Bournemouth. So here I'm starting from Bath. and partly because it's a freight locomotive probably, and partly because this is a fairly flat line in the beginning. Once I get it going, it accelerates pretty quickly. But I took my time easing it out because actually one of the differences about the simulator Evening Star is that it's easier to crash. You can even have a blowback if you handle the dampers incorrectly in a tunnel, which I did several times because I had forgotten that detail of steam locomotive operation. One thing you don't have is the mechanical stoker, because the British never used them. Their locomotives were always small enough, even the Duchesses were small enough so that they could be hand-fired. Although the Duchesses pushed the envelope a little bit. Now, what has often been said is that after Evening Star, train simulators declined somewhat because they ended up going back to text-based interfaces, like in arguably the infancy of computer simulators generally. The next major release that I'm aware of was Gatwick Express in 1988, where they simulated one of these Class 73s. Now, of course, the Gatwick Express service also used Junipers like this one in the late 90s, early 2000s. And now they use the latest version of the Electrostar like this. But because the game is so old, they use the old stuff, even if it's dual mode, diesel and electric. In other words, you could run on third rail or on diesel power. In this, they're not clear about what you're doing. Presumably, you're running on third rail. The diesel engines on 73s were not very high endurance, actually. So, here I'm given my, I guess, bulletin orders? I guess the equivalent of bulletin orders. And I'm going to take this text-based simulation of the Gatwick Express down not very far, because I'm running out of time for this video, but I'll run it a bit. I had to figure out what the controls were on this one by trying every key on the keyboard. It was not intuitive at all, and I never figured out how to operate the AWS. This game is quite rare, actually. It's difficult even finding out who developed it, actually. The actual developers were named Dee-Kay Systems, but very few people actually know this, and I had trouble getting the information. You generally find ROMs to run on your Commodore 64 emulator on different websites that have credited the people who developed the ROMs more than the original developers, which I don't know if I particularly like. Abandonware or no, it just seems like poor form. Because this is actually, I don't mind the physics of this simulator so much, it's just that it's, you know, devoid of sound, devoid of graphics. It's a lot like playing Oregon Trail, actually. Even some of the same colors. One thing I'm not sure about the accuracy of is how easy it is to overload your motors. Your traction motors are very sensitive in this, and I don't know if that's true of a real Class 73. I would have trouble believing that a service unit that was used for so long and still is sometimes used today would be so temperamental, actually. See, I'm already at max motor current, and I'm, you know, not pushing it too hard. I mean, it's full throttle, yes, but it's only going low 20s of miles per hour here with a 9-car train. So I don't know about that. And it regularly cuts out on you. Seems to be accelerating all right here, though. And I'm actually running out of time for this video, but I wanted to show you some of the really early train simulators that I maybe one of the only people who still follows. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.